All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to tackle a huge question. Who's in charge? From kings and queens to modern-day presidents, we're breaking down the different ways countries decide who gets to call the shots. I mean, have you ever really stopped to think about it? Who actually gets to make the rules we all live by every single day? It's a question that affects everything, so let's dig in and see how these different systems actually tick. Okay, so when you boil it all down, government's pretty much split into two big camps. And it all comes down to one really simple idea. Where does the power really come from? And that big split is between autocracy and democracy. Think of it like this. In an autocracy, all the power flows from the top down. It's all in the hands of one person, like a monarch who just inherits the job. But in a democracy, it's the exact opposite. The power starts from the ground up with the citizens, who get to choose their own leaders. This chart makes it super clear, right? Look at the direction of the power. The autocratic model is a classic pyramid, one person at the very top. The democratic one? Power just flows outward from the citizens themselves. That visual difference, well, that's everything. So in an autocracy, the idea of citizen participation just isn't really a thing. It's not just that the leader holds all the cards. They basically own the entire casino. Democracy, on the other hand, is completely built on the idea of people having a say. The government's power comes directly from the people, and the main way they use that power is by voting. But, and this is a big but, not all democracies work the same way, as we're about to see. So let's zoom in on these democracies. They all agree that citizens should hold the power, but they mostly come in two main flavors, parliamentary and presidential. The key difference is the relationship between the people who make the laws and the top leader. We'll start with the most common model you'll find on the planet. I mean, from the UK and Germany to Canada and Australia, the parliamentary system is the go-to structure for a whole lot of the world's democracies. Okay, now the way the power flows here is super important because it's a little indirect. See, citizens don't actually vote for the prime minister directly. Nope, they vote for a local representative. The political party that wins the most of those local races gets to form the government, and their leader becomes the prime minister. See that extra step in there? Now, let's flip the coin and look at the other main type, the presidential democracy. The whole idea here is what's called separation of powers. They basically try to build a wall between the branch that makes the laws and the branch that enforces them. And here's where it feels different for you as a voter. You're basically casting two big, separate votes. One is for your local representative in the legislature. The other is a direct vote, just for the president, who runs the whole executive side of things. So, if we boil it all down, the crucial point is this. In a presidential system, you cast a vote specifically for the top job. In a parliamentary system, you vote for your local rep, and that vote, when added up with everyone else's, determines which party, and therefore which leader, gets to take charge. Okay, enough theory. Let's see how this stuff actually works in the real world. We're going to look at two major European countries that both use the parliamentary system, but each one adds its own unique twist. The UK is the classic example, right? They use a system called first past the post. It sounds complicated, but it's really simple. In each of the 650 districts, the candidate with the most votes wins, period. The party that wins a majority of these districts gets to form the government, and its leader becomes prime minister. And while they do have a monarch, that role is purely ceremonial. The real political power is in parliament. Germany also has a parliamentary system, but theirs is really designed for collaboration. Their proportional system means that if a party gets, say, 30% of the national vote, they get roughly 30% of the seats in parliament. This makes it really tough for one party to win all by itself, so they're often forced to team up and form alliances or coalitions. This encourages compromise, but it can also make decision-making a little more complex. All right, let's switch gears completely and look at a presidential system for our next example. We're heading to Russia, which, at least on paper, is structured very differently from what we just saw in the UK and Germany. To get a feel for how Russia's presidential system works in practice, just look at this number, 77%. That was the reported share of the vote won by the incumbent in the 2018 election. A figure like that really tells you a lot about the political landscape. So, officially, Russia is a presidential republic. Citizens directly elect the president, who holds a ton of power, including the authority to appoint the prime minister. It's also worth noting that recent constitutional changes have altered the rules around presidential term limits, allowing for longer tenures in power. However, this is where some observers start to point out a pretty big difference.
This quote really captures a perception that even with the presidential structure, the election process itself is fundamentally different from the kind of competitive races you might see in Germany or the UK.
And those observers raise some specific points. They report on media coverage that heavily favors the person in power, significant hurdles for opposition candidates who just want to run, and a feeling that the election is less of a genuine contest and more of a way to confirm the existing leadership. You know, all of this brings us to a much bigger question, one that applies to any democracy, whether it's parliamentary or presidential. What are the essential ingredients for a genuinely free and fair election? Well, across the board, a healthy democracy really relies on these key things: a free press so everyone can get good information, a level playing field for all the candidates, independent checks to make sure the vote is counted correctly, and crucially, citizens have to have the right to speak their minds and even protest without fear. So, as we've seen, governments can have different structures, leaders can have different titles, but the real measure of any system isn't just what's written down on paper, it's about the actual power a citizen has to participate and make a choice that truly matters. In the end, how power is shared, whether it's held by one person or by millions, that's what shapes a nation's destiny. So I'll leave you with this to think about. How does the role we, as citizens, are allowed to play ultimately define the country we call home?